Section 6 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. Reading by Bologna Times. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Great Enterprises of Women in the Times of Chivalry. The times and the manners of chivalry, by bringing great enterprises, bold adventures, and extravagant heroism into fashion, inspired the women with the same taste. The two sexes always imitate each other. Their manners and their minds are refined or corrupted, invigorated or dissolved together. The women, in consequence of the prevailing passion, were now seen in the middle of camps and of armies. They quitted the soft and tender inclinations and the delicate offices of their own sex for the courage and the toilsome occupations of ours. During the Crusades, animated by the double enthusiasm of religion and of valor, they often performed the most romantic exploits. They obtained indulgences on the field of battle, and died with arms in their hands by the side of their lovers or of their husbands. In Europe, the women attacked and defended fortifications. Princesses commanded their armies, and obtained victories. Such was the celebrated Joan de Montfort, disputing for her duchy of Bretagne, and engaging the enemy herself. Such was the still more celebrated Margaret of Anjou, Queen of England and wife of Henry VI. She was active and intrepid, a general and a soldier. Her genius for a long time supported her feeble husband, taught him to conquer, replaced him upon the throne, twice relieved him from prison, and though oppressed by fortune and by rebels, she did not yield till she had decided in person 12 battles. The warlike spirit among the women, consistent with ages of barbarism, when everything is impetuous, because nothing is fixed, and when all excess is the excess of force, continued in Europe upwards of 400 years, showing itself from time to time, and always in the middle of convulsions, or on the eve of great revolutions. But there were eras and countries in which that spirit appeared with particular luster. Such were the displays it made in the 15th and 16th centuries in Hungary, and in the islands of the Archipelago and the Mediterranean, when they were invaded by the Turks. Everything conspired to animate the women of those countries with an exalted courage, the prevailing spirit of the foregoing ages, the terror which the name of the Turks inspired, the still more dreadful apprehensions of an unknown enemy, the difference of dress, which has a stronger effect than is commonly supposed on the imagination of a people, the difference of religion, which produced a kind of sacred horror, the striking difference of manners, and, above all, the confinement of the female sex, which presented to the women of Europe nothing but the frightful ideas of servitude and a master, the groans of honor, the tears of beauty in the embrace of barbarism, and the double tyranny of love and pride. The contemplation of these objects, accordingly, roused in the hearts of the women a resolute courage to defend themselves, nay, sometimes even a courage of enthusiasm which hurled itself against the enemy. That courage, too, was augmented by the promises of a religion which offered eternal happiness in exchange for the sufferings of a moment. It is not therefore surprising that when 3 beautiful women of the Isle of Cyprus were led prisoners to Selim to be secluded in the seraglio, one of them, preferring death to such a condition, conceived the project of setting fire to the magazine, and, after having communicated her design to the rest, put it in execution. The year following, a city of Cyprus being besieged by the Turks, the women ran in crowds, mingling themselves with the soldiers, and, fighting gallantly in the breach, were the means of saving their country. Under Mahomet, too, a girl of the Isle of Lemnos, armed with the sword and shield of her father, who had fallen in battle, opposed the Turks, when they had forced a gate, and chased them to the shore. In the 2 celebrated sieges of Rhodes and Malta, the women, seconding the zeal of the knights, discovered upon all occasions the greatest intrepidity, not only that impetuous and temporary impulse that despises death, but that cool and deliberate fortitude which can support the continued hardships, the toils, and the miseries of war. Other particulars respecting females during the age of chivalry. When a man had said anything that reflected dishonor on a woman, or accused her of a crime, she was not obliged to fight him to prove her innocence. The combat would have been unequal, but she might choose a champion to fight in her cause, or expose himself to the horrid trial, in order to clear her reputation. Such champions were generally selected from her lovers or friends. But if she fixed upon any other, so high was the spirit of martial glory, and so eager the thirst of defending the weak and helpless sex, that we meet with no instance of a champion ever having refused to fight for, or undergo whatever custom required, in defense of the lady who had honored him with the appointment. To the motives already mentioned we may add another. He who had refused must inevitably have been branded with the name of coward, and so despicable was the condition of a coward in those times of general heroism, that death itself appeared the more preferable choice. Nay, such was the rage of fighting for women, that it became customary for those who could not be honored with the decision of their real quarrels to create fictitious ones concerning them, in order to create also a necessity of fighting. Nor was fighting for the ladies confined to single combatants. Crowds of gallants entered the lists against each other. Even kings called out their subjects to shew their love for their mistresses by cutting the throats of their neighbors who had not in the least offended. In the 14th century, when the Countess of Blois and the widow of Montfort were at war against each other, a conference was agreed to, on pretense of settling a peace, but in reality to appoint a combat. Instead of negotiating, they soon challenged each other, and Beaumanoir, who was at the head of the Britons, publicly declared that they fought for no other motive than to see, by the victory, who had the fairest mistress. In the 15th century we find an anecdote of this kind still more extraordinary. John, Duc de Bourbonnois, published a declaration that he would go over to England with 16 knights, and there fight it out in order to avoid idleness, and merit the good graces of his mistress. James IV. Of Scotland, having, in all tournaments, professed himself knight to Queen Anne of France, she summoned him to prove himself her true and valorous champion by taking the field in her defense, against his brother-in-law, Henry VIII. Of England. He obeyed the romantic mandate, and the two nations bled to feed the vanity of a woman. Warriors, when ready to engage, invoked the aid of their mistresses, as poets do that of the Muses. If they fought valiantly, it reflected honor on the Dulcineas they adored, but if they turned their backs on their enemies, the poor ladies were dishonored forever. Love was at that time the most prevailing motive to fighting. The famous Gaston de Foix, who commanded the French troops at the battle of Ravenna, took advantage of this foible of his army. He rode from rank to rank, calling his officers by name, and even some of his private men, recommending to them their country, their honor, and above all, to shew what they could do for their mistresses. The women of those ages, the reader may imagine, were certainly more completely happy than in any other period of the world. This, however, was not in reality the case. Custom, which governs all things with the most absolute sway, had, through a long succession of years, given her sanction to such combats as were undertaken, either to defend the innocence or display the beauty of women. Custom, therefore, either obliged a man to fight for a woman who desired him, or marked the refusal with infamy and disgrace. But custom did not oblige him, in every other part of his conduct, to behave to this woman, or to the sex in general, with that respect and politeness which have happily distinguished the character of more modern times. The same man who would have encountered giants or gigantic difficulties when a lady was in the case, had but little idea of adding to her happiness by supplying her with the comforts and elegancies of life, and, had she asked him to stoop and ease her of a part of that domestic slavery which, almost in every country, falls to the lot of women, he would have thought himself quite affronted. But besides, men had nothing else, in those ages, than that kind of romantic gallantry to recommend them. Ignorant of letters, arts, and sciences, and everything that refines human nature, they were, in everything where gallantry was not concerned, rough and unpolished in their manners and behavior. Their time was spent in drinking, war, gallantry, and idleness. In their hours of relaxation, they were but little in company with their women, and when they were, the indelicacies of the carousal or the cruelties of the field were almost the only subjects they had to talk of. From the subversion of the Roman Empire to the 14th or 15th century, women spent most of their time alone. They were almost entire strangers to the joys of social life. They seldom went abroad, but to the spectators of such public diversions and amusements as the fashion of the times countenanced, Francis I was the first monarch who introduced them on public days to court. Before his time, nothing was to be seen at any of the courts of Europe but long-bearded politicians plotting the destruction of the rights and liberties of mankind, and warriors clad in complete armor, ready to put their plots in execution. In the 8th century, so slavish was the condition of women on the one hand, and so much was beauty coveted on the other, that, for about 200 years, the kings of Austria were obliged to pay a tribute to the Moors of 100 beautiful virgins per annum. In the 13th and 14th centuries, elegance had scarcely any existence, and even cleanliness was hardly considered as laudable. The use of linen was not known, and the most delicate of the fair sex wore woolen shifts. In the time of Henry VIII, the peers of the realm carried their wives behind them on horseback when they went to London, and, in the same manner, took them back to their country seats, with hoods of waxed linen over their heads, and wrapped in mantles of cloth to secure them from the cold. There was one misfortune of a singular nature, to which women were liable in those days. They were in perpetual danger of being accused of witchcraft, and suffering all the cruelties and indignities of a mob, instigated by superstition and directed by enthusiasm, or of being condemned by laws which were at once a disgrace to humanity and to sense. Even the bloom of youth and beauty could not secure them from torture and from death. But when age and wrinkles attacked a woman, if anything uncommon happened in her neighborhood, she was almost sure of atoning with her life for a crime it was impossible for her to commit. End of Section 6.
Section 7 of Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World. Sketches of the Fair Sex in All Parts of the World by Anonymous. Chapter 7. French Women. Though the ladies of France are not very handsome, they are sensible and witty. To many of them, without the least flattery, may be applied the distich which Sappho ascribes to herself. If partial nature has denied me beauty, the charms of my mind amply make up for the deficiency. No women upon earth can excel, and few rival them, in their almost native arts of pleasing all who approach them. Add to this an education beyond that of most European ladies, a consummate skill in those accomplishments that suit the fair sex, and the most graceful manner of displaying that knowledge to the utmost advantage. Such is the description that may safely be given of the French ladies in general. But the spirit, or rather the evil genius of gallantry, too often perverts all these lovely qualities, and renders them subservient to very iniquitous ends. In every country, women have always a little to do and a great deal to say. In France, they dictate almost everything that is said, and direct everything that is done. To fold her hands in idleness, and impose silence on her tongue, would be to a Frenchwoman worse than death. The sole joy of her life is to be engaged in the prosecution of some scheme relating either to fashion, ambition, or love. Among the rich and opulent, they are entirely the votaries of pleasure, which they pursue through all its labyrinths at the expense of fortune, reputation, and health. Giddy and extravagant to the last degree, they leave to their husbands economy and care, which would only spoil their complexions and furrow their brows. When we descend to tradesmen and mechanics, the case is reversed. The wife manages everything in the house and shop, while the husband lounges in the backstop, an idle spectator, or struts about with his sword and bagwig. Matrimony among the French seems to be a bargain entered into by a male and female to bear the same name, live in the same house, and pursue their separate pleasures without restraint or control. And so religiously is this part of the bargain kept, that both parties shape their course exactly as convenience and inclination dictate. The French girls are kept under very strict superintendence. They are not allowed to go to parties or places of public amusement without being accompanied by some married female relation, and they see their lovers only in the presence of a third person. Marriages are entirely negotiated by parents, and sometimes the wedding day is the second time that a bride and bridegroom see each other. Nothing is more common than to visit a lady and attend her parties without knowing her husband by sight, or to visit a gentleman without ever being introduced to his wife. If a married couple were to be seen frequently in each other's company, they would be deemed extremely ungenteel. After ladies are married, they have unbounded freedom. It is a common practice to receive morning calls from gentlemen before they have risen from bed, and they talk with as little reserve to such visitors as they would in the presence of any woman of refinement. In no country does real politeness shew itself more than in France, where the company of the woman is accessible to every man who can recommend himself by his dress and by his address. To affectation and prudery the French women are equally strangers. Easy and unaffected in their manners, their politeness has so much the appearance of nature that one would almost believe no part of it to be an effect of art. An air of sprightliness and gaiety sits perpetually on their countenances, and their whole deportment seems to indicate that their only business is to strew the path of life with flowers. Persuasion hangs on their lips, and, though their volubility of tongue is indefatigable, so soft is their accent, so lively their expression, so various their attitudes, that they fix the attention for hours together on a tale of nothing. The Jewish doctors have a fable concerning the etymology of the word Eve, which one would almost be tempted to say is realized in the French women. Eve, they say, comes from a word which signifies to talk, and she was so called because soon after the creation there fell from heaven 12 baskets full of chit-chat, and she picked up 9 of them, while her husband was gathering the other 3. French ladies, especially those not young, use a great deal of rouge. A traveler who saw many of them in their opera boxes says, "I could compare them to nothing but a large bed of peonies." After the French Revolution, it became the fashion to have everything in ancient classic style. Loose flowing drapery, naked arms, sandaled feet, and tresses twisted were the order of the day. The state of gross immorality that prevailed at this time ought not to be described if language had the power. The profligacy of Rome in its worst days was comparatively thrown into the shade. Religion and marriage became a mockery, and every form of impure and vindictive passion walked abroad, with the consciousness that public opinion did not require them to assume even a slight disguise. The fishwomen of Paris will long retain an unenviable celebrity for the brutal excess of their rage. The goddess of reason was worshipped by men under the form of a living woman entirely devoid of clothing, and in the public streets ladies might be seen who scarcely paid more attention to decorum. Italian women. Dr. Goldsmith thus characterizes the Italians in general: "Could nature's bounty satisfy the breast, the sons of Italy were surely blessed. Whatever fruits in different climes are found, that proudly rise or humbly court the ground, whatever blooms in torrid tracts appear, whose brightly succession decks the varied year, whatever sweets salute the northern sky, with vernal leaves that blossom but to die, these here disporting own the kindred soil, nor ask luxuriance from their planters' toil, while sea-born gales their gelid wings expand, to winnow fragrance round the smiling land. But small the bliss that sense alone bestows, and sensual bliss is all the nation knows. In florid beauty groves and fields appear, man seems the only growth that dwindles here. Contrasted faults through all his manners reign, though poor luxurious, though submissive, vain, though grave yet trifling, zealous yet untrue, and even in penance planning sins anew. All evils here contaminate the mind, that opulence departed leaves behind. For wealth was theirs, not far removed the date, when commerce proudly flourished through the state. At her command the palace learned to rise, again the long fallen columns sought the skies. The canvas glowed beyond even nature warm, the pregnant quarry teemed with human form, till, more unsteady than the southern gale, commerce on other shores displayed her sail, while naught remained of all that riches gave, but towns unmanned and lords without a slave. And late the nation found, with fruitless skill, its former strength was but plethoric ill. Yet still the loss of wealth is here supplied by arts, the splendid wrecks of former pride. From them the feeble heart and long-fallen mind an easy compensation seem to find. Here may be seen in bloodless pomp arrayed the pasteboard triumph and the cavalcade, processions formed from piety and love, a mistress or a saint in every grove. Almost every traveler who has visited Italy agrees in describing it as the most abandoned of all the countries of Europe. At Venice, at Naples, and indeed in almost every port of Italy, women are taught from their infancy the various arts of alluring to their arms the young and unwary, and of obtaining from them, while heated by love or wine, everything that flattery and false smiles can obtain in these unguarded moments. The Italians, like their neighbors of Spain and Portugal, live under the paralyzing influence of a religion that retains its superstitious forms, while little of life-giving faith remains. Like them, they have lively passions, are extremely susceptible, and in the general conduct of life, more governed by the impetuosity of impulse than rectitude of principle. The ladies have less gravity than the Spanish, and less frivolity than the French, and in their style of dress, incline towards the freedom of the latter. Some of the richest and most commodious convents of Europe are in Italy. The daughters of wealthy families are generally bestowed in marriage as soon as they leave these places of education. These matters are entirely arranged by parents or guardians, and youth and age are not unfrequently joined together, for the sake of uniting certain acres of land. But the affections, thus repressed, seek their natural level by indirect courses. It is a rare thing for an Italian lady to be without her cavaliere servante, or lover, who spends much of his time at her house, attends her to all public places, and appears to live upon her smiles. The old maxim of the Provençal troubadours, that matrimony ought to be no hindrance to such liaisons, seems to be generally and practically believed in Italy. In Genoa there are marriage brokers, who have pocketbooks filled with the names of marriageable girls of different classes, with an account of their fortunes, personal attractions, etc. When they succeed in arranging connections, they have 2 or 3% commission on the portion. The marriage contract is often drawn up before the parties have even seen each other. If a man dislikes the appearances or manners of his future partner, he may break off the match, on condition of paying the brokerage and other expenses. End of section 7.